The monitor flickers to life in a windowless room deep inside Louisiana State Penitentiary. 6 hardened investigators lean forward, expecting nothing more than a final, pointless formality. The infrared feed blooms green and black, and there he is, Marcus St. Duval, lying perfectly still inside the satin-lined casket, orange prison jumpsuit still bright even in death, a single red rose clutched against his chest like a silent promise. The timestamp reads 02:10 a.m., exactly 11 minutes after the coroner signed the death certificate. The room is silent enough to hear the hum of the recorder. Then Marcus's eyelids flutter. One of the detectives gasps. Another knocks over his coffee. Because Marcus Duval, certified dead for hours, just opened his eyes inside that sealed coffin and stared straight into the hidden lens. Rewind 22 months. Marcus Duval was never supposed to be a legend. 6'4", 260, built like a cathedral door. He walked the Tier C yard at Angola like he owned the concrete. They called him Saint, not because he was holy, but because he never spoke unless it was to quote scripture, right before he broke someone's jaw for disrespecting a weaker inmate. 10 years earlier, he'd been a decorated Army Ranger, 2 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star with Valor, until one night in Kandahar changed everything. The official report said friendly fire. Marcus said otherwise. The Army disagreed. And dishonorable discharge and a 25-to-life sentence for armed robbery followed within 18 months. Everyone who knew the file assumed the robbery was just the final domino after PTSD and whiskey knocked the rest down. Inside Angola, Marcus became the one man even the gang generals stepped around. Not because he ran with the gangs. He didn't. But because he protected the ones nobody else would, the mentally ill kids, the elderly doing life for a third-strike burglary, the transgender inmates the system forgot. He broke up rapes in the showers with nothing but his fists and a calm voice that sounded like rolling thunder trapped in a church. Guards hated him because he made them look incompetent. Wardens feared him because he was too smart to bribe and too righteous to threaten. So when a new prisoner, 19 years old, terrified, and clearly innocent, was found hanged in his cell the same week a major heroin pipeline got exposed, every finger pointed at Marcus. They said he silenced the kid to protect the trade he secretly controlled. The jury took 4 hours. Guilty. Death sentence. Even on death row. Marcus never cursed the system out loud. He spent his days reading law books and writing letters for men who couldn't spell their own names. He mentored the hopeless. He prayed with the damned. And every night, at lights out, he whispered the same line into the dark, "I'm not done yet." The execution was scheduled for October 31st. Halloween because Louisiana has a sense of humor darker than most. Lethal injection, 3 drugs, the usual cold theater. Reporters packed the witness room. The victim's family sat stone-faced on one side. On the other, only one person showed up for Marcus' sister Mary Grace, a 70-year-old Catholic nun who'd been visiting him every month for 8 years. She held a rosary so tightly her knuckles went white as the warden read the death warrant. At 6:02 p.m., the drugs began to flow. Marcus's chest rose once, twice, then settled. The EKG flatlined. The warden nodded. The doctor pressed 2 fingers to Marcus's neck, listened with a stethoscope, then pronounced, "Time of death, 6:09 p.m." The curtains closed. The body belonged to the state now. But the state had a problem. 3 weeks earlier, an anonymous package arrived at the Attorney General's office. A flash drive containing crystal clear audio of the assistant warden negotiating prices with the Aryan Brotherhood for the new heroin pipeline. The very pipeline Marcus supposedly died protecting. The voice on the tape laughed about taking care of the saint problem once and for all. Suddenly, the convenient suicide of the 19-year-old witness didn't look so convenient. Suddenly, Marcus's convictions smelled like a setup. But Marcus was already dead, and the men on the tape were still breathing. The AG needed proof that would hold up in court, something undeniable. They needed to know if Marcus had truly been silenced, or if someone had helped him along. That's when someone, and to this day no one will say whose idea it was, proposed the unthinkable. Louisiana law allows autopsy filming for capital cases if there's suspicion of misconduct. But an extension of that statute, the Department of Corrections quietly secured a judge's signature to place a pinhole, motion-activated, infrared camera inside Marcus Duval's coffin. Officially, it was to document chain of custody and rule out postmortem tampering. Unofficially, they wanted to be damned sure the man was actually dead before they buried evidence that could burn the entire administration to the ground. So on November 2nd, All Souls Day, 6 investigators, 2 deputy wardens, and a very nervous funeral director gathered in the prison's rarely used chapel. The casket, Simple Pine, State, issued, was already sealed. The funeral director, sweating through his suit, unscrewed the lid under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Marcus lay exactly as the coroner left him, hands crossed, rose placed by Sister Mary Grace resting on his chest. Rigor mortis had come and gone. His skin had taken on the waxy pallor of the newly dead. The camera, no bigger than a lipstick tube, was affixed to the lid's satin just above his head, lens pointed down. A tech synced it to a secure server. Lid closed. Screws replaced. The feed went live. They scheduled burial for the next morning in the prison cemetery. Point lookout. Row upon row of white crosses stretching into the mist. No family claimed the body. No ceremony planned. Just a backhoe and 2 trustees to fill the hole. The investigators went back to the command center to wait out the night, half expecting the battery to die or the motion sensor to pick up nothing but rats. At 2:06 a.m. the system chirped. Motion detected. At 20:17 a.m. Marcus opened his eyes. The scream that tore through the control room was primal. One detective stumbled backward so hard he cracked the drywall with his shoulder blade. Another crossed himself repeatedly while cursing in Cajun French. The senior investigator, Captain Rachel Thibodeaux, a woman who'd seen bodies torn apart by alligators without flinching, felt her legs give out because Marcus didn't just open his eyes. He smiled. Not the rictus of a corpse, but the same calm, knowing smile he used to give terrified kids on the yard right before he stepped between them and a blade. Then he spoke. The microphone was never meant to pick up audio. The camera was visual only for legal reasons. But the coffin lid was thin, and his baritone carried like a church organ. Still watching me, huh? A soft laugh rumbled, low and warm. Good. Means somebody finally listening. He sat up. The rose stayed perfectly balanced on his chest, as though held by magnetism. His wrists still bore the purple bruises from the restraints on the gurney. But the arms that pushed against the satin were strong, veins corded, muscles flexing like he'd never been near sodium thiopental in his life. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a lazy salute toward the lens. Told y'all I wasn't done. In the control room, chaos. Radios exploded with traffic. The warden was dragged out of bed in his boxers. SWAT teams scrambled. The prison went into lockdown so fast the alarms didn't even have time to finish their first wail. Captain Thibodeaux, the only one still thinking straight, shouted, "Nobody touches that coffin until I get there." But Marcus was already moving. He pressed both palms against the lid and pushed. Wood groaned, then cracked. One screw popped loose and pinged off the chapel's tile floor like a gunshot. Another. The lid lifted 6 inches. A huge, orange-sleeved arm emerged. Fingers splayed against the pine like he bench, pressing the weight of the world. Then the lid flipped back entirely, crashing against the altar rail. Marcus Duval stood up in his coffin, 6'4" of impossible, a man who had flatlined for 8 hours and 48 minutes, and looked around the empty chapel like he'd just woken up from a nap. He brushed a speck of lint off his jumpsuit, placed the rose gently on the altar, then turned to face the camera he knew was rolling somewhere in the ceiling. "Captain Thibodeaux," he said, voice gentle, "you've got about 4 minutes before your tactical team kicks in that door. I'm gonna need you to listen fast." He reached into the chapel's confessional booth, the one no one had used since the 1980s, and closed the lattice door behind him. 30 seconds later, the SWAT team breached, shotguns up, red dots dancing across the casket like fireflies. Empty. They tore the chapel apart. They brought dogs. They ripped up pews. Marcus was gone. The only thing he left behind was the rose and a flash drive taped to the underside of the confessional's kneeler. Captain Thibaudaux played it on the chapel's ancient VCR. Yes, VCR, because that's all the prison still had. The screen flickered, grainy and green-tinted, showed the death chamber from Marcus's point of view. A tiny camera sewn into the collar of his jumpsuit. The footage began minutes before the execution. You could hear his heartbeat on the audio, steady, calm. The doctor swabbed his arm. The warden asked if he had last words. Marcus looked straight into the gallery, straight at Sister Mary Grace, and said, "See you on the other side." Then the drugs flowed. But here's what the official monitors never showed 30 seconds after the EKG flatlined. Sister Mary Grace stood up in the witness room, pressed her rosary against the glass, and whispered a prayer in Latin so old it predated the Vatican. The heart monitor chirped once, twice, then settled back into silence. The doctor never noticed, but Marcus did. On the tape, you could see his pupils dilate slightly, the only sign that something had shifted. The footage continued. Him being wheeled to the morgue, the autopsy, the stitches, the coffin. All of it while his chest never moved. Until the moment the coffin lid closed and the chapel went dark. Then Marcus's voice, soft, "Thank you, sister." The flash drive ended with a single still images, a scanned document, an Army medical report dated 12 years earlier, classified top secret. Subject Sergeant Marcus Duval. Experiment designation Lazarus protocol. Purpose of field. Testing of experimental battlefield resuscitation. Nanites capable of inducing suspended animation indistinguishable from clinical death. Status success. Recommendation immediate termination of subject to prevent compromise. Signed by a general whose name would make every news network in America explode if it ever saw daylight. Marcus hadn't been framed for murder to protect a drug ring. He'd been framed because someone in the Pentagon realized the soldier they thought they'd erased a decade ago was still walking around with $1 trillion secret swimming in his bloodstream. And when they couldn't kill him in combat, they waited until he was locked in a cage where no one would ask questions. The control room watched the final seconds of the tape. Marcus in the confessional, recording himself with the same collar camera. "I didn't break out tonight to run," he said. "I broke out to finish what I started. The men who killed that boy are still here. The men who sold my country's secrets are still free. I'll handle the first part. You handle the second. Tell Sister Mary Grace her prayer worked better than she knows. And tell the world the saint ain't dead. He just needed a bigger pulpit." The screen went black. 6 hours later, the assistant warden was found in his office with a single red rose on his chest and a handwritten confession pinned to his shirt. The Aryan Brotherhood's shot, collar on C, tear-hanged himself with his own bedsheet. Only the knot was tied in a perfect ranger, role no gangbanger would ever learn. By noon, the heroin pipeline was burned to the ground, every guard on the take suddenly begging for protective custody. And somewhere out in the bayou, a 6'4" ghost in an orange jumpsuit was moving through the night with the calm certainty of a man who had already died once and didn't fear doing it again. The Lazarus file hit the federal courts like a bomb. Careers ended. Generals retired overnight. The Army denied everything, of course, but the footage was already on every screen in America. Congress launched investigations. The president gave a speech. And somewhere, Sister Mary Grace smiled quietly in her convent garden, watering roses that bloomed blood, red even in November. They never caught Marcus Duval. Some say he made it to Mexico. Others swear they've seen him in uniform again, somewhere the cameras don't go. But every year, on All Souls' Day, a single red rose appears on the empty grave at Point Lookout. No footprints leading in or out. Just the flower, fresh as the day he carried it out of that coffin. And if you visit Angola at 20:17 a.m., guards say, you can still hear a deep voice rolling through the tears like distant thunder, quoting Revelation, "Behold, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of death and hell." Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe a man could beat death itself for the sake of justice? Have you ever met someone who refused to stay down no matter How many times the system tried to bury them? Drop your thoughts, your own stories, hell, even your wildest theories in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit you in the chest, do me a favor, hit that like button so YouTube shows it to more people who need to be reminded that some people are just too damn stubborn to die. Share it with that friend who loves a good redemption arc. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell, because every week we're bringing you cinematic, real-life impossible stories that Hollywood wouldn't dare touch. Until next time, stay curious, stay fearless, and keep fighting the good fight. This is your narrator, signing off. See you in the dark.